You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
I'm good, man. Second day of a new career. Working new career. Working as the
that sounds interesting.
Director of Digital Identity Advisory Services at RSM US LLC. I think I got that right. LLP. Darn it. Yes, that's correct. I'm getting there.
It's very exciting. It's day 2. We're together again. The identity mullet lives on, as our friend Jody says. So hopefully she's listening. Congratulations to you. And to me as well, since we're building quite the practice here. So this is pretty cool. But yeah, very excited to have you on board, and to the moon, as the kids say.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. I mean, everybody I've met so far has been super helpful, and it's always a nervous thing starting with a new organization. I mean, heck, you just went through it not that long ago, but knowing you and then all the other folks who have been very gracious has made it quite enjoyable for the first day and a half.
Yeah, the honeymoon period is alive and well still. So
yeah. I've got a little bit of time.
We didn't scare you off with like crazy orientation or stupid stuff like that.
No, and already starting to book some travel. So planning on being out at the Gartner IAM Summit in Las Vegas. Was that August 21st?
It's August 22nd to the 24th. It's a Monday through Wednesday this year. Instead of the normal sort of like after Thanksgiving, before Christmas, they've moved it up to August. So yeah, we're both going to be in Las Vegas, which is very cool. And we're going to plan on doing some podcast recording out there as well. Try to find a quiet corner for us to do our shenanigans in, and maybe invite some folks over and have conversations with, which would be pretty neat, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a real key. So if you're listening and you want to meet us, or maybe, get involved with the podcast in any way, just reach out to either Jeff or I, or both of us. Use LinkedIn is probably the best tool to do so. And we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to meet you in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Do the proverbial fist bump and just have a conversation and keep it real. I don't know. I feel like I'm young and hip at this point with keep it real and to the moon, but
to the moon is
right
not even close to new, is it? Isn't that from like?
I mean, I think it says like the meme stocks and things like that, but that was kind of like, at least where I've heard it most recently is like in the context of some junk crypto coin. I probably shouldn't say junk, but some cryptocurrency, being artificially inflated and pushed sky high.
Oh, I guess I was thinking of the old Ralph from the Honeymooners. To the moon with you, Alice.
I think I'm like, one of these days, pow, right in the kisser.
So politically incorrect.
Which I don't think you could probably say that on TV these days. Yeah, I'd probably be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, right.
So we're going to be at Gartner. Jim has joined me over at RSM, which is awesome. So looking forward to continued success there. I don't know about you, but I've gotten a lot of like cool feedback over it seems like the last couple of weeks from people who've been listening to the show on LinkedIn, which is pretty neat. It's always interesting to see kind of like who's listening, right? Who's sending in the feedback, but also where they're at. And it's pretty neat. We truly are a global show at this point. Got thousands of folks listening to our identity stuff pretty much every week, which is very neat. And so what I thought we'd do this week is take some of the questions that we've gotten over the last really kind of few weeks and do what we like to call in the biz a mailbag episode.
Biz.
Taking questions in the biz, that's right, as professional podcasters, is take a few questions that we've received that we thought were pretty interesting and maybe the audience might get some interest from, and answer them, put our spin on it, and see where things go. So we've selected 3, and we'll start with the first question, and I'll just read them off here. This is from Joe in California. We will leave last names and companies out to keep just to make sure that we don't out people where maybe they don't want to be or whatever it is. But Joe in California, what is more important, having an IAM program, and I think by this he means the people and sort of like the process, or having IAM technology like Okta, SailPoint, or CyberArk? So things like access management, identity governance, privilege access tools. So I think the intention here is like, where do you start? Maybe do you start with people and process in the program, or do you get a technology first and then kind of build around that? What are your thoughts, Jim?
I've seen both be successful. I think that this is one of those consulting answer depends, because I think it depends on the size and maturity of the organization. If you have a very large organization, you've got to assume that there's some kind of footprint of the technology already in place, maybe some old Oracle technology, or maybe a custom homegrown solution for, managing access requests, routing, provisioning requests, things like that. Maybe some kind of spreadsheet process for reviewing access, certainly doing some level of authentication, right? People don't just, even in small organizations, you don't just go to an application and get access to the crown jewels of the organization. So, single sign on and even privilege access, there's got to be some level of technology there, even if it's not good, right? Even if the end users have to have 8 usernames and passwords, or even if you're doing some kind of, not very secure way of managing shared passwords and stuff like that. So in that case, where you've got um, technology, but it's not the right or appropriate technology, I say start with the program, because then you bring the stakeholders to the table, you put together a strategy, and you go through a formal process to select the right technology based on your use cases and requirements. Now, if you're in the case where you actually have an absolute vacuum of technology, or you're coming up, right? Especially smaller organizations, it's not going to be appropriate probably for 100, 200 person organization to have a lot of whoopla around having an IAM program. And I think starting with, ideally you have a trusted partner who knows the landscape well enough and can advise you in more of an informal way, rather than going through a whole strategy development on, here are the technologies that would be a good fit for you, that I think are, mapped to your technology skill sets or whatever. And then I think it makes sense where you can start with technology. But I think for, again, larger organizations who find themselves, it's kind of, they've become laggards in this area in terms of their technology footprint, starting with a program really makes sense. What do you think?
Yeah, I find it difficult to believe that there's not any technology there. Active Directory is probably the most prevalent. Most organizations have it, or they have Azure, or Google by way of like Google Office or Google Mail. Um, I guess I still want to start with people and process though, because if I don't know who owns identity and who's responsible and accountable for those services, it's really tough to really get anything going from a measurement aspect, just from an accountability aspect, those sorts of things. Um, I know plenty of organizations, they'll go off and say, yeah, we're going to go buy, X tool, and there isn't an IAM program. And they sometimes struggle with that because they don't really have any direction. They're like, oh yeah, we need a password tool, so we're going to go buy LastPass, not to pick on any particular company, or Okta or Duo, right, for MFA or whatever it may be. They're buying a tactical solution and not really thinking strategically. So I tend to lean towards people and process, because my thought is lots of companies get away without having a ton of IAM technology. Probably have authentication, like you mentioned, but lots of companies don't have identity governance administration technology. Lots of companies still don't have a privileged access management vault, or session monitoring and recording capabilities, or key rotation or secrets management and rotation, things like that. But they do have people and they do have processes. So even if it is a manual environment, at least there's some direction and some accountability for the delivery of those admittedly very manual services. So I like to start with people and process because it generally takes some, some buy-in and some consensus building to buy some of these more dedicated technologies that are frankly getting more and more expensive all the time. So that's tend to that's I guess that's where I tend to start. But the consulting answer, it depends. But I think in a vacuum, I'd want to know who owns IAM, and to me, that's people and process and the IAM program itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about moving up the maturity rankings in terms of having a program, you're talking about formalizing the program, making it more formal. Um, when you think about other areas of maturity, it's about instituting automation, paper trail, things to make it operate better. In terms of that program formality, I think the smaller, more immature organization, you still need a strategy, right? I don't think it makes sense for anybody to just go out, buy technology and throw technology at a solution and hope it works. But you probably don't need all the formal steps that a larger organization would require. You don't need maybe a steering committee meeting with a representative from all these different parties. You can do it a little more informally. If you're the technology leader, you can kind of come up with the strategy or work with your trusted partner to come up with the strategy and then start implementing it. If you're in a larger organization, especially a global organization where you've got stakeholders, different business units or different geographies, as well as different departments, you've got to come up with a way to keep those folks included, get their buy into the strategy, keep them, knowing, understanding what their involvement has to be going forward. So, I think everybody needs a strategy. It's just how much formalization do you put around that process depends on where you are in terms of your size and maturity of an organization.
I'm glad you mentioned that word formality, because I think sometimes we get stuck in sort of like this definition of like, oh, it's a black tie, suit and super formal and very rigid. And I hear that all the time. It's like, okay, we need a more formal IAM program, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is, 8 people sitting in a conference room, raising their thumbs like American Idol to say yes or no on whether or not this project is going to go forward. But I do think that there is some structure to the way that the program is being run. Doesn't mean that you need to have, suits and ties and all that fun stuff. It can be more informal as long as there is someone in charge, that there is some rhyme or reason that things are moving forward. You're right. You don't need, all that hoopla, as you mentioned, for the smaller organizations. You might have it that you're, wearing multiple hats, et cetera. So I'm glad you kind of picked that, because I sometimes struggle with that word and kind of talking with clients. Okay, well, we got to get just more formal with the identity program itself. But what does that actually mean in the real world? Doesn't necessarily mean, death by committee or 800 steps to get anything done. I think it just means having more structure to the program. And maybe structure is a better word when it comes to, hey, let's make sure we have a more structured IAM program, that there is some guidelines or rails to keep people on.
Yeah. Well, I think, the bigger the organization is, the more that structure is going to be important. The, like, let's take this example. The way I like to run an IAM program at larger organizations, you have a set of policies and standards. Those policies and standards are meant to be applied to all of your technology. So if you have a password policy, for example, password's got to be 12 characters long. That applies to every system in your organization, right? Now, you may have a group that runs a mainframe that can only do an 8-character password. I'm picking on this because it's such a common example, right? Or some system only allows an 8-character password, can't live with the password policy, can't integrate to your SSO technology. I think the proper solution is that they should have to apply for a formal exception. Now, if you're in a 200-person organization, that's overkill, right? I mean, what's the point? It's like you've only got so many applications that you need to manage. But if you're an organization with, hundreds or even thousands of applications, you've really got to run things through the formal process.
Yeah, how do you even track it, right? I mean, I think even if you're just writing it down on a piece of paper and say, okay, we know that there's this app out there. We're not going to formally manage it, but at least we know about it. I think that's just having that structure and the process to it and kind of grow into it. I don't think it's something you need to like solve overnight, but I think you should start to think about as the organization grows. Maybe you're not going to be a 200 person or a 50-person organization forever. Maybe that you do grow at some point. The sooner you start to have structure, the easier it will be to kind of grow and mature that sort of thing.
Yeah. Any other
Okay,
questions in the mailbag?
let's go to Andrew in Georgia. I like this question because this is something that I like to ask when I'm talking with customers too. Is he asks this: are social media accounts in the scope of IAM? I think yes, but my management disagrees. What are your thoughts? So, Jim, are social media accounts in the scope of IAM? Do you side with Andrew or are you management? Boo.
Well, I think it's a great question because I don't think there's one answer. Here's what I kind of think. I don't think it's in the core of what most IAM programs are focused on. Most IAM programs are going to be focused on the use case around, employee access. Now, if you use the broad definition of who has access to what, it's definitely included in that. So is also included is all the people who work for your company if they have access to, you know, Wells Fargo or Bank of America systems or other systems where they have accounts that were issued by other companies. So you should be managing all of that as well as your social media. I guess where I'm going with it is that I don't think it's core scope of IAM, but I do think it eventually gets there. So if you're starting from a very immature point, you're probably not all the way there. So I guess what I'm saying is that if you're an organization that is very much in the public eye, it becomes much more important that you're able to manage those social media accounts. But I'd say also you really have to work with the teams that use them to make sure it's a good user experience, right? It can't be like, hey, the person's got to go to CyberArk to check out a password to use the Twitter account. That's just not that's not going to flow well enough. So you have to look at solutions designed specifically for social media.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I was not with you until you added your caveat at the end about social media being a core use case. Definitely then I think it is within scope. I think in general should be in scope, but I think you have to define what that scope is. Are you actively managing the account or are you providing guidance to the team, probably marketing or communications, that is actually controlling the account? I think at a minimum, you're at least providing guidance and a set of policies, procedures, standards, whatever it may be, for them to follow that aligns with your IAM program policy and standards. Make sure MFA is turned on. Make sure that if there's a review of who has access to those accounts and that they're not posting stupid stuff, because we see that all the time. Someone's getting breached. Making sure they have MFA so those breaches are minimize the chances of it. Those sorts of things. There are certainly dedicated tools out there to manage those accounts, but they are pretty specific. It surprises me a little bit that the privileged access management players, the big ones like CyberArk, Beyond Trust, Delinea, formerly known as Dichotic and Centrify, and others, haven't really embraced figuring out how to manage some of those social media type accounts more directly, rather than just having a simple vault. Um, it's not an area that I'm an expert on from a technology standpoint, but you have things like Hootsuite that has some capabilities out there that can probably help out. I know there's another one. Actually, there was somebody who reached out on LinkedIn recently. We got to get in touch with that person and maybe get them on to talk about kind of management of social media accounts from an identity perspective. But I do think they should be at a minimum governed by policy and standards, but they should not be forgotten and just left for some other team to kind of figure out. I think they should be included as part of the strategy.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, see, you have the advantage that I have to go and answer first, and then you get to just yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, what you just said there with the my mind went right to, okay, how do you get to a point where you're actually responsible for managing them, which is much harder than, having a policy in place. And having a policy in
Mhm.
place, let's be frank, is like there's no money involved with putting a policy in place.
Right.
Um, and even tracking whether or not the policy is being followed is not that much. There's not that much of an investment there. Now, in terms of using technology to do it, to deal with essentially what I think are going to be shared accounts, right? Because let's imagine you're a sports league and you've got social media, like you've got a Twitter account, and you know, are taking pictures from games or videos from games, and you want to get them posted on the Twitter. I'm not sure exactly how most of those leagues work, if they've got 30 people or 15 people who are at all the different games who could potentially do that, or if it gets funneled back to some central source and they post it. But the more bureaucracy that is involved with that process, the slower it's going to be to get that video online. And like the name of the game, I think, has got to be speed to getting it online before somebody else goes and steals your thunder. Right? If it takes 12 hours to get a 5-second video online, then what's the point?
Yeah. That timeliness, I think, of the delivery of the content is obviously important to social. Um, yeah, I guess I wasn't thinking about actively managing it. I think that, frankly, is a losing battle right now if you don't have specialized social media technology identity controls. Like if you're trying to do it through your average access management or identity governance or even privilege access management tools, I don't think that's a winning fight right now. But I do think they should at least be accounted for from a strategy and from a program perspective. And then, the organization has decided, do they want to make the investment in a specific tool that covers those specific use cases or not?
I think you're right.
And I'm
We have to
guessing
get
most don't.
we have to get someone on who can kind of give us the lay of the landscape in terms of the technology that's available, to
Yeah.
start to manage it. But you're right on in terms of the policy. I think what I was, where my head was with Andrew's question was, if I'm a company that somewhere in the United States and we make boxes, like, all right, and they call me in to put together an IAM strategy, my big focus isn't going to be on their Twitter account. Right. And it's way out in terms of priority. However, if you're
Yeah.
obviously the higher profile company, the more you're a target for those social media account hacks.
I think I at least take a minute to ask the question and find out. And if I'm comfortable with what's being done and the controls, if I'm thinking about like from either an IAM program manager or maybe a CISO, I have a lot of targets, right? It may not be the highest priority, but at least I ask the question and sort of make a mental note of where that is. And maybe if they're not using MFA, maybe that's the immediate thing. Get MFA on that account and we'll come talk to you in a couple years, right? But at least get MFA. Something like
MFA's
that.
right.
So I would at least ask a basic question and then move on to things that might be more strategic from an identity perspective, for example.
Yeah, where MFA can start to be a real headache, though. We did talk about this in our MFA discussion, is shared
Yeah.
accounts. So
Yep.
if you're using it, I'm using it. All right. Well, who gets the SMS text?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, and by the way, here's maybe this is a little bit of banter, but you're controlling the questions in the mailbag. But I just got a message from Matt asking, "Oh, so you and Jeff both went to RSM. What's going to happen to the podcast?"
Well, we are still actively recording it as we speak, as both employees of RSM. So that's what's happening to the podcast.
Yeah,
Nothing is happening. We are going to continue to do this as we have for the last 3 years. We just celebrated our third birthday. This is episode 155. I think we're averaging like 1.1 episodes per week if you do sort of like the math. But yeah, the plan is to keep this going. We'll still keep it, as weekly as we can, as we have over the years. So no changes, not anticipating any huge, commercials or branding exercise or things like that. I'm sure we might talk about some things in the future, but it'll be the same, vendor neutral Jim and Jeff show, that we run kind of independent from our real jobs. So good question. I'm glad somebody brought that up.
Yeah. All right. Anything else in the mailbag?
Yeah, let's do one more here. Nigel in Belgium. Where this is a good one. Where does privacy sit within an organization? Should the IAM team own that?
Generally, I would say no. The IAM team doesn't own privacy. There's going to be, a bigger organization. You'll have like a chief privacy officer and a whole privacy team. But I think IAM has privacy as a stakeholder. IAM or privacy is going to provide requirements. I think getting them involved early in the development of your strategy is the way to go. If you already have your strategy developed, work with them to make sure that they support the strategy that it accomplishes. I think the other thing to be aware of is that their space is evolving even more quickly than ours with the IAM digital identity space. IAM digital identity is definitely evolving quickly, but privacy keeps evolving even more quick than that because states and countries are constantly putting out new regulations and it's changing that landscape. So that could be impacting the regulatory environment or the legal environment for your organization, and your IAM team needs to adapt to that. So yeah, I think it's a matter of working hand in hand with privacy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the overlap becomes a little stronger if you're thinking about it from like a customer identity perspective, where those controls need to be built potentially into like a profile management system or something like that. I see a greater hand in the steerage, maybe of how that might work within the concept or the framework of what the IAM program is looking to accomplish with the customers. Probably less so on the employee side because I don't think I typically see privacy management for the employee, but definitely on the customer side. I would say I agree though. I don't think IAM owns it. I think they're a partner in potentially delivering some of the services behind it from a user experience perspective, maybe, or storage maybe of certain bits of data within like a master user directory or profile or whatever it may be, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think I've been involved with enough projects where, as this whole privacy landscape from GDPR on has evolved, right? And when IAM teams kind of get in their own sphere of trying to solve, okay, what is our privacy landscape and how do we have to build our IAM systems? It can really throw a whole wrench in the works in terms of data residency and things like that. And like, you just don't have the knowledge to answer those questions. And it's beneficial to be able to go to somebody who can speak authoritatively on this is how these regulations affect our company and how we need to address them in terms of our system deployment. And so if you have a privacy office, that's the starting point. I also think, if you don't, potentially pulling in somebody from your legal team who is responsible for how those regulations affect your company is going to be key.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's hard to be an expert on everything. Privacy is evolving so quickly, and the methods with which to control that and the laws around the world are constantly changing. Seems like there's a new one popping up every 6 months or a year or so in different countries. So, it goes. For me, I think about it from a base use case perspective. Because this is like a question that I think I hear a lot is, how are we going to manage all these different privacy regulations? And my general guidance is they're all pretty similar. It's really about making sure you have the appropriate audit trail. You've got the appropriate, controls to be able to remove or obfuscate data, based on the user, those sorts of things. If you can do those basic things, chances are you're probably in a much better position to comply with whatever privacy regulations come up. And those are sort of like base, plumbing essentially from an identity perspective.
Yeah, those are great points.
All right, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up for this week? Thanks to Joe, Andrew, Nigel, and a few others who sent questions in. Before we go, Jim, I know that I just moved. I think you're looking at moving soon. And we're going to go positive this week because I think when people think about moving, they think of, at least I do, maybe some of the hassles that go along with it, right? Moving stinks or, whatever it may be. But what's your favorite thing about moving?
Favorite thing about moving. It's tough because I'm one of those people who, my general belief is that we can all agree that moving is a pain in the neck. So I
Yes.
could easily get dragged into that negative. But I think if you think about moving from the standpoint, not the act of moving, because the act of moving, I think you have to be a sadist to think that's fun. Uh, but if you think about the end product of moving, it's like you're moving hopefully to have a better life. And I'm thinking, with my move, like the company that does my trash pickup, some weeks they just don't show up. And so I have a trash can that's like overflowing with trash. I'm like really hoping that that's not going to happen anymore. Um, my internet, my Wi-Fi, good once a month will just be garbage for an entire day, and it's really hard to do customer calls and things like that when your Wi-Fi is just going up and down all day. So hopefully my Wi-Fi provider will be better. And when I think about that, I'm like, I know people are like, you've got to live in the moment. I've been hearing this advice all my life, and I think it's good advice because you don't, otherwise, your life just speeds by you. But when you're in these times where it's like time to hunker down, just get stuff done, and maybe your circumstances aren't that great, like you're in the middle of a move or, whatever reason, don't live in the moment. Live in like this picture of the future of where you're heading. And if you're not happy with where you are, don't fixate on the fact that you're not happy where you are. Think about where you're going. And so that's what I also like about moving is like gives me a picture of like where I'm going. It's going to be better. And I can go through kind of those hard times to get to that better state.
Sounds to me like you're full of hope when you're moving.
Yeah.
Hope for better things. I think that's a good outlook. I think for me, I think the best thing is it's a good opportunity to like clean house, get rid of drawers full of crap that you don't need. I think everybody at this point has like that box of cables that they've stored that are like, oh, here's my, USB type B cable from like 20 years ago. Well, maybe I might need that. If it's been in a box for 20 years or 5 years or whatever it is, you probably don't need it. Probably a good idea to like purge or recycle, some of that stuff. So I certainly did that. I cleaned a major house when I moved. Like I just had, decades of just stuff. I was like, I haven't used it. It's time to go. And so I think that helps with a fresh start too. It's like, okay, we're not bringing that baggage literally, with us to the new place. Is start with a little more of a clean slate, which is always kind of cool.
I don't know about that, man. I never throw cables away. And I've had especially plugs. So if you have
Mm.
a plug that on the other end has some kind of random connection, you just never
Mm-hmm.
know when that's going to come in handy.
Yeah, that's true. I bit the bullet. It was just kind of like I had so many cables. I'm like, okay, well maybe I'll use that. And I downside. I didn't get rid of them all. So now I have like a box with cables. I have a box with like power related items. But now I only have one box of each instead of like multiple. So I feel like I made progress. And, now I'm starting to pull some of that stuff out and kind of redeploy, how things are in the new house we've got.
Well,
So,
I like that. And you
so
actually
yeah.
know where it is now.
Yeah, try to be a little more organized with some of that stuff. It was good. It was a good opportunity to like, okay, you start. I still have a junk drawer, so of course, it's like my odds and ends. Everything goes in there, but try to be a little more consistent with what I'm doing with other stuff. But I'm
Yeah.
still working on my office in the new place. I haven't been home much for the last few weeks since we moved because I've been on the road. As I come to you live from Racine, Wisconsin, as I record this in a hotel, so I'm looking forward to having a couple days at home at some point to be able to continue to work on
What
the
is
office.
Racine, Wisconsin known for?
Well, let's see. Frank Lloyd Wright, probably, because this is where lots of his architecture resides, from homes to S.C. Johnson has their headquarters here. They have the research tower that's part of their property. They also have the administrative building that has, it's the building that has what they call like the, I think they call it the water lilies, where it is like these essentially spires that are inside their one of their offices. So there's that. Kringle, which is like a pastry up here. It's kind of similar to like a Danish. Is very popular around here. I'd never heard of it until I started coming here with some regularity, but I think those are probably the two things. It would be like Frank Lloyd Wright architecture and Kringle. And I'm sure my friends in Racine will probably tell me there are other things, but those are the things that I think of.
Well, the Kringle thing reminded me of when we were in Buffalo. What was the famous meal that we had in Buffalo?
In Buffalo or Rochester?
Rochester.
You're talking about the garbage plate?
Yeah. Did we do an episode of the podcast called
Yeah.
The Garbage Plate?
Yeah, we definitely called it. I think it was like another odds and end episode. It was kind of like this. It was I think I called it like the IAM garbage plate or something like that. But yeah, it was something we did around the time that we were both in Rochester for
So
work.
for people who don't know what the garbage plate is, it's like whatever they have in the kitchen. It could be French fries, some meatloaf, some whatever. Throw it on the plate.
Leftovers.
Yep,
I like throwing on a plate and yeah. Leftover pizza, leftover lasagna. Second day lasagna is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it is about like that, but it's good stuff. All right. We are way off topic, but again, let's go ahead and wrap things up. That's fine. This is our time, our fun time.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and wrap it up for this week. Again, we'll be at Gartner, so if you want to do the fist bump or maybe help contribute or be part of the podcast, Jim and I are planning on doing some live recording out there and kind of making plans around that. Hit us up on LinkedIn. We're always happy to talk with folks. If you've got questions about different things or want our thoughts and opinions, send them our way. We'll get them incorporated into the show at some point. And with that, hit us on the web, identityatthecenter.com, Twitter @IDAC podcast. And thanks for listening. And we'll talk with everyone in the next one. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.